Over the years, the Mafia series has shown us all kinds of ways a person can get pulled into the life. Each one different, but all tied to the same things: money, power, survival, and the dangers that come with entering that life. For Thomas Angelo, it started out as just another night in the Great Depression. He was behind the wheel of his cab trying to make ends meet when two made men show up and shove a gun in his face, forcing him to become their impromptu getaway driver. Saving them would push him into an entirely different path, as that moment forward would place him in the middle of that war between Morello and Don Salieri, eventually siding with the Salieri crime family and being one of Salieri's most trusted men. Vito Scaletta's story, on the other hand, took another route. He was fresh out of the army, back in his city, still struggling to get by. All he wanted was a better life for himself and his family, but the opportunities he found were soaked in blood, tied to debts and favors you could never really walk away from. And then there's Lincoln Clay, who didn't fall into the life by accident. He came for it swinging. After the Marcanos betrayed the black mob and murdered everyone close to him, Lincoln declared war on them. One by one, he would tear the Marcanos apart, leaving nothing standing. Now with Mafia the Old Country out, we get a new angle, new families, new names, and a closer look at people we thought we already knew. Don't worry, I'm not going to be spoiling the whole thing today. What I want to focus on here is Enzo, particularly his origin story, and how the Old Country sets him up. This is not a review, but a better understanding of the world that Enzo is coming from. And since the game is still freshly out, for those of you that want to experience it yourself, this video, all the gameplay and everything that you're going to be seeing is tied specifically to the prologue, so it's about the first hour and a half. Probably less than that. I want to say it's actually a solid hour-ish, but I really took my time. I'm also going to show a little bit of artwork that comes with the deluxe version of the game, so it is overall pretty light. In addition to that, I may supplement it a little bit with footage from the trailers that have already been shown and dropped months prior. So it's pretty overall spoiler light in terms of the bigger story, but you never know when it comes to new games and spoilers. But Enzo Favara's story is extremely different from the other protagonists. All of them were grown men, making a conscious choice to enter a life they knew would come with benefits but many dangers as well. When we meet Enzo for the first time, on the other hand, he's only a teenager who isn't trying to seek money, power, or any sort of prestige, but rather trying desperately to get out of what is practically slavery. At 5 years old, Enzo was sold off by his father to the grueling sulfur mining industry of Sicily as a way to pay off his own debts. We may never fully know what the exact details of his debts were, but what we do know is that clearly he gave away his son so that he can walk away as a free man. From that point forward, Enzo would practically lose his identity. He would become property to that mine and be known from that moment forward as a caruso, which is slang for boy. But during the early 1900s, the same time period the game takes place in, caruso specifically was a way to denote mine boy, or a child that ventured down into the sulfur mines. It was a label no one wanted that came with unimaginable working conditions. The caruso were boys ranging anywhere from 5 years old, the youngest age they were quote-unquote allowed to work, all the way up until they were teenagers. And considering they were slaves and were property, many of them will stay as minors for the rest of their lives, but their ages only mattered when it came to the work itself. Each boy was expected to reach daily quotas on the number of trips they were supposed to make, from clawing and chipping away at the rock at the bottom of the mine with dull, rudimentary tools such as hammers, chisels, and pickaxes. In Mafia the Old Country, there are some collectibles giving some insight into the difficulty surrounding Enzo specifically. For one, there's a letter from the board of directors overseeing the mine that rejects the request for newer or just slightly better quality tools. The argument here is with better tools, the mine's production rate would increase. However, the price of such tools is allegedly something the investors refuse to front the cost for, stating it won't be financially viable to equip such a large site as the one Enzo's at. So the alternative is to open new mining shafts and add an extra work shift without any additional pay to the workers, thus boosting their profit margins that way. The extra shift would be opening up shafts that had previously caved in, clearing the way forward for other workers that'll head down and continue the usual work of hammering away at the rock, and then carry those baskets full of sulfur rock back to the top at a designated collection point. Boys as young as 5 years old would carry these baskets full of sulfur, weighing as much as 55 to 66 pounds. Older boys were to carry as high as 155 to 176 pounds. Everyone was expected to carry an absurdly excessive amount of weight for them, and do so in conditions that only made it much harder. The mines the Caruso worked in were filled with many dangers. Apart from the previously mentioned cave-ins, which was a constant worry, gas leaks and other toxic fumes that burned the eyes and lungs were also a prominent feature to this work environment that they were subjected to for anywhere from 8 to 10 hour periods. The long hour shifts, grueling work, and lack of any kind of protection, as we see Enzo and the other workers caked in dirt, wearing rags for clothes and barefoot against the rigid rocks, only resulted in many crippling injuries, lung disease, and early deaths. Historically speaking, the Caruso became the symbols of industrial exploitation, their suffering highlighting the stark divide between profit-driven elites and the exploited workforce. By 1904, Enzo had lived this horrible life for roughly 12 years, meaning he's only 17, sold to the mine at 5 years old in 1892, which was the height of the sulfur mining industry. But since then, he's been quietly saving money up in order to pay off his father's debts and buy his freedom, which was something boys sold off to pay off the family's debts could technically do, but it was extremely rare due to the brutal work and minimal pay received for it. However, Enzo kept going thanks to the help of his friend Gaetano and a letter he had from an uncle Silvio back in Empire Bay. Thanks to the help of both of those, and maybe even the keepsakes his father left with them behind, was able to keep him pushing forward, not only by just hopes of what can be in the future, but defiance, resilience. Enzo clearly has a fire inside of him and vows he would make it far from here. It could be he's also nearing his breaking point, at one point standing up to El Merlo, the underboss of the Spadaro crime family and head guard of the sulfur mine. He's also seeing rejected food by the mine's cook for missing mealtime on account of being down in the mine for so long, sneaking into the camp's food storage, apparently something he and Gaetano had some level of previous experience doing before, and sleeping in a rundown shack on nothing more than a thin mat of hay with a simple blanket on top of it, in a room shared with multiple people not far from the mines. The game does a phenomenal job at exploring the lives of the Caruso and giving us a great idea of the rough life he was brought up in with his father's abandonment to a life of slavery, not skewing his views on helping or doing right by people. But it does also establish a very firm foundation in him being very grateful for the little things in life, for the bare minimum of being treated like a human being, and being allowed to do things on account of his own free will. Conversely, it sets up the Spadaro clan to be the ones at odds with him. The Spadaros are the ones who profit most from the mine, directly making Enzo and all the other Caruso here on the mining site their property, giving them the freedom to do as they see fit with everybody. From physically attacking the workers, punishing them by sending them down to clear out dangerous mining shafts, or locating others believed to be stuck or dead. What's interesting is, yet again, this is historically accurate. With other industries based around Sicily's wealth of natural resources, such as citrus production and tuna fishing, criminal gangs infiltrated the sulfur trade. Working both with and against mine owners, the gangs would eventually come to hold a monopoly over Sicily's key mining areas. Yet another element they heavily exploited, since mining in Sicily remained largely unindustrialized. It's the perfect introduction and origin story to a complex and morally rich character that we will later be discussing in great detail, as with many other characters throughout the Mafia series, from Leo Galante, the Galante family, the Spadaros, and many others. So subscribe for some more character breakdowns tied to Mafia the Old Country. Special thank you to the patrons, Konkin, Ryan Smith, and Daniel Homan, who help make these videos possible. If you want early access to the videos here on the channel, or an ad-free viewing experience, access to an exclusive podcast, and many other pieces of content that help support the channel directly, feel free to check the Patreon out.